Are you ready to navigate the Common App minefield and hopefully avoid some of those pitfalls that could derail your dreams? In today's video, I am talking about the biggest mistakes students make in their Common applications. So grab a pen and paper and let's make sure that you get in for all the right reasons. Before we do that, if you could like and subscribe to this channel, you can get even more information on my biggest tips to get into college. Let's dive in and talk about the biggest mistakes I see students make on their Common applications. Before I do that really quick, some of you might not know what the Common App is. Common App, which is what I'm going to refer it to because that's what everybody calls it, is the Common application. This is an application that is supposed to, in theory, replace every single individual school's application. So instead of applying with 15 applications to 15 different schools, you use this one application to apply to many schools. Now, not all schools are on the Common App. Most of them are, but some schools very much still have their own private applications, and then certain systems. For example, the University of California system has its own application, as do some other states as well. So it's by no means, most of my students have minimum 2 different types of applications. Many have 3 or 4. So do not think the Common App is all you're gonna have. It's not, okay? So there is the Common App, but you have this one application, okay? But understand you are adding schools to the application, okay? So yeah, you're gonna have like your name and address and all that kind of stuff. That'll be all the same. But every time you add a school, that school is going to auto-populate some questions. Essays are the big thing. Okay, so yes, technically it's one application, but something that drives me insane is when I will often, and it's usually mom. I'm sorry, moms. It's usually mom. We will get going to all these applications. We'll get to the end, everything's submitted, and I get, oh, well, it's just this one application. So let's just add 5 more schools because it's one application and it's so easy. It doesn't work like that, okay? You add 5 schools, the application is going to populate 5 more schools with all their questions and the essays. So every school you add to a Common App, I always say is like, it depends on the school. Sometimes it is really easy to add and it's like 15 minutes. Other times you're adding 5 more hours of work, okay? So the Common App, it's one application, yes, but every school has its own stuff, okay? That will be more information for a different video. But today I want to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes that students often make on their Common application. I'm gonna start with the biggest one that students make. And it's also my biggest pet peeve. So why not start with my biggest pet peeve? Because I work with this every day in the fall. So what's the number one? Waiting too late. Waiting till too close to the deadline. Procrastinating, okay? Those things. Basically waiting, missing the deadlines, those things, okay? Now, the Common application, yes, it's this one application, okay? Every school has their own deadlines, okay? The majority are going to be November 1st. Let's just use November 1st because those are most early action deadlines. And at least when I'm working with students, I won't even let you do regular decision deadlines except for very few situations. So let's say it's November 1st, okay? The system will literally shut down. Like, you cannot submit after the deadline, okay? So you can't submit, like, it shuts down. Nowadays, I'm having a lot of students really struggle with deadlines. It's a COVID thing. They're taking way too much late work at schools and they don't understand the concept of a deadline. And unfortunately, when you get to college, the deadline is actually like died line, can't go past it, right? Okay, so it literally will shut you out of the system if you don't make the deadline, okay? Now, whenever that deadline is, and this usually happens, like last year, it was around, I want to say like October 23rd-ish, somewhere in there, but usually a couple weeks before the deadline, it will start really slowing down because there's so many students trying to get in the system, okay? If you wait, so let's say we're using November 1st as the deadline. If you wait till October 31st, that system will kick you out. It will bug. It's awful. And I even tell students, they're like, well, the deadline's not till the 31st. I'm like, I don't care what they say. I don't even go into that system after the 25th. Like, we submit applications with my students together. We do it together and we go line by line through it. But if you don't do it by my deadline, okay, I don't help you, okay? No, I am not getting out of bed at 11 o'clock at night the day before a deadline, like an hour before a deadline, because you didn't finish your essays or you're getting kicked out of the system. Guys, there's nothing I can do to help you at that point. The system's just crashing because it's overloaded, because you procrastinated. So I've had students ask, I had a student one time, wasn't a student I was working with one-on-one, because my students I don't let do that. This is just a different student. And he said, it literally went through at 11:59. And he's like, but I don't know. Like, I think it went through. What if it didn't? Oh my God, the system was crashing. I couldn't submit it. I was freaking out. And he's like, and I said, yeah, because the system, it starts crashing then. So yeah, that happens, right? And he's like, well, doesn't the school know that it's crashing? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, so if it went in at, let's say 12:03, right? Then that's okay. And I'm like, no, they're going to say, why would I want you as a student that waited till the last minute? Okay, one, because I don't want you as a student if you wait till the last minute. Okay, two, no, because they shut the system down on the deadline. And if it's 12:03 and it was due at midnight, it shut down. So I don't know. And if that, in this case, because the college only had one deadline, if you missed that deadline, you just didn't go, like, you're just not going there, like, right? They don't get your application. They're not going to review it. Like, you're done. So that's the biggest pet peeve. A lot of students, they procrastinate, they drag their feet, and that system will start bugging about a week or two before the deadline. And you don't want to have to deal with that. It is so stressful. Again, that's a couple of years ago, I just drew my line. Like, I put my foot down. I was like, don't even call me with questions at that point. Like, I can't help you. I told you for months you had the deadline. So it is what it is. I'm just letting you know, the Common App, it does start crashing. It will start bugging out. The other thing that will happen is there's a lot of holes. So even when we're going through with students, like, we'll go line by line by line through that Common App, and we find things. So different holes are going to come up, like, oh, I need to get a letter of rec from this person, or I need to get this from my counselor, or oh, I need to get this information from my dad. It'll be like random what comes up, and it happens to every single student. It's very normal. As long as I've been doing this, I've never gotten through an application with a student where just something came up when we were going through it that we needed to get information from something, and it was going to take time to get that information, and hence why you don't want to be dealing with this at 11:59 when it's crashing and kicking you out, because you'll miss the deadline. So you want to give yourself time to where when those little holes come up, which they will, you have at least a few days to get whatever information you need and then submit your application. So that's my biggest advice for tip number 1 is be on top of it. Be a couple weeks early before the deadline so that you don't run into those problems. My tip number 2 for the Common App, and I'm just going to mention this briefly because it's about personal statements, also known as the main essay, the Common App essay. People call it different things. It doesn't matter. These personal statements, okay, I'm going to talk about essays in a whole different video. I'm not going to get into that here, but it is part of the Common App. So I wanted to bring up one of the biggest mistakes students make is just poor personal statements, okay? Now, the Common App will have lots of different sections within it. It really is a minefield, okay? It's very easy to miss those sections. One of the big sections is the personal statement. Every school also will have their own supplemental essays. So that's a big myth around Common Apps, is that it's just one application technically yes, but not really, because schools all have their own information they want, including supplements, okay? But I see a lot of students where, I don't even know, like, I'm like, did you think about what you're gonna write about? Or like, sometimes it's just not appropriate. Sometimes you didn't even answer the prompt. I don't know, I've seen a lot of stuff, but having a poor essay is a really big deal, because especially now in the days where it's very much test optional or test blind, depends on the school, but they're not really looking at test scores. It's always, GPA is always the first thing they're gonna look at. And of course, like your class load and all those things. But GPA, let's say GPA, right, grades, how well you perform. The next thing is gonna be essays, okay? Because they wanna know who you are outside of your academics. Who are you as a human being, and how do you add value to their school? So poor personal statements, big no-no on the Common App. The third biggest mistake people make on their Common App is underemphasizing their extracurriculars. Now, in the Common App, there's a section called the Activities section. This replaces what used to be a resume, and it's formatted in a very specific way. And this is where you get to tell schools, you know, all your activities, your clubs, your paid work, your volunteer work, your obviously all your sports. That could be school sports, that could be club sports, it doesn't matter. This is where you tell them all the things you do outside of school. And students often have a hard time bragging, right? So they underemphasize extracurriculars in the activity list. Depending on what they write their essay about, they can also tend to do this in the essay, but it's awkward. I get it. We don't like to brag about ourselves. So they want to be humble, but college applications is not where you're humble. This is where you have to brag, because the students who do brag are going to look better, okay? And you want them to not look better, because you might be the better candidate for a certain school. And they don't know that if you don't tell them. So a lot of times students will underemphasize their extracurriculars. You do not want to do that. Brag, brag, brag all you can, because you want to stand out as great of a student that you are, and you want to show how much value you can add to their school. You can do this in your essay. You also definitely need to do it in your activity list. So that is very important. The fourth thing students tend to do wrong on the Common App is entering their grades incorrectly. I see that all the time. It's easy to do. It's easy to mess up, okay? So in the Common App, there's all these nooks and crannies I've been talking about, okay? And it's very easy to miss these nooks and crannies. But some schools want an official transcript, okay? Other schools do what's called self-reporting your grades, okay? And if they want self-reported grades, a tab on the Common App is going to pop up and you have to enter your grades. It's super annoying. I don't know why schools do that, but whatever, it is what it is. So you will have to enter every single class by term, and it has to be written exactly how it is on your transcript, okay? So if your class says like Alg 1-2, and it's like in Roman numerals, right? Not the number, okay? When you enter it, it needs to literally say exactly what's on the transcript, okay? So that's number one. 2, it needs to be correct by term. You need to make sure you categorize the class correctly, because that's a thing too. If you don't do that, then the system will not put you in the correct thing. So like, for example, if you enter something wrong, it may enter as like a different subject, right? It might come up as like an elective versus it's supposed to be a vocational credit or whatever. It depends on your state and what the requirements are. But anyway, it could be a problem. It'll basically show you're deficient in credits. It can do that. It can weight your GPA differently if you didn't enter the correct level that you're at. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong. So entering your grades incorrectly is a really big deal. I tell students, like, don't rush through that. Make sure it is entered correctly, because almost all my students do it incorrectly. I'm going to fix stuff. So that's fine. You just want to make sure you plan for it and really understand how to enter them, and that you have a transcript in front of you to make sure it's all done correctly, so that the school right? The college is getting that information, and that's the first thing they look at are grades, right? And your GPA, because they want to see how you perform. And if that is not in there correctly, right, it can really hurt you and make you look less competitive than another student, but really you just entered it wrong. So that is a big thing for the Common App. The fifth mistake students tend to make on the Common App is what I'm going to call proofreading, but I'm not just talking about the essays, right? I've already talked about that. You need to make sure they're good and do a good job on those. So I don't just mean proofreading the essays. The Common App, again, has a lot of nooks and crannies, and it is very easy to make mistakes on it, or to, like, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong on the Common App, okay? But you have to go literally line by line by line by subject, okay? So the Common App on one side will have different tabs, and then on the top, there's also different tabs. So you have to go these tabs line by line and these tabs line by line, okay? Or you will miss stuff very easily. Let me tell you how easy it is to not only miss stuff, but also to enter things incorrectly, even if you didn't miss it, okay? So if I'm working with one-on-one clients, okay, with my students, by the time we get to August, when the Common App opens, because it opens on August 1st every year, by that point, students I'm working with privately, we have their college list is solidified, their activity list is, another little tip I wasn't gonna talk about in this video, but because it's actually important. Doing your activity list in the Common App is the biggest pain in the butt. Okay, it's not easy to edit inside the Common App. Do it in a template. So my students do it in a template in a Google Doc outside, and we edit back and forth and stuff. And then we just copy paste it when that time comes. So little tip, pain in the butt to do it in the Common App. Okay, so my students are done with their activity list. They're done with their essays. Okay, so that's all done by when it opens on August 1st. It then takes my students, I'd say average a solid 5 hours to just fill out the Common App, just for my students to, and we actually do like a little class I do with all of my students, and I show them like line by line. Here's like, don't forget to do this, and make sure you do this, and here's how you enter your grades. Like I go through that with them, okay? So they kind of know. Obviously you kind of learn by doing, but they have a good idea of what they're supposed to be doing, okay? Then they go fill it out on their own, okay? That still takes them about 5 hours, okay? Entering grades will take you an hour, okay? They gotta copy paste all their activities over. You gotta add all your schools. You gotta copy paste your essays in. Like there's a lot that goes into that. Then, because I actually submit one-on-one with my students, but before they do that, I have counselors on my staff, like high school guidance counselors who I've trained on the Common App, and they're familiar with it, right? Then they meet with their high school counselor, okay? That's a 2-hour meeting, and they go through line by line by line and answer their questions and make sure it's all good to go, right? Before they come to me, okay? Then I have a 2-hour meeting with my students. I also go line by line by line, and then we actually submit them together. It's actually super fun by the time we get to that point. So we submit the applications together, okay? So understand, even by the time it gets to me, they've have all their work done, right? We've had a class on it with me. They've gone through it for 2 hours line by line with another counselor. By the time it gets to me, another 2-hour meetings, I still find mistakes, okay? Like that's how easy it is to mess things up or to miss a section or whatever, or they have questions, they don't know how to do it. Like, all these things happen, okay? That's with me. So when I tell you proofread, I'm not saying like, yes, you're checking spelling and grammar and commas and all these things, but I literally mean on the Common App line by line, because you will miss a line. You'll go over the character limit. You'll be under the character limit. Like there's all these things that will pop up. And sometimes we have to grab, hence to point 1, why you need time. A lot of times things will come up and we need information from someone, okay? Or we need to grab something from their student, their high school portals or something. Like we always will find stuff. It's very normal. Every student has that. And we need to have time to be able to fix that stuff. before, or like new essays will pop up, like they weren't there a week ago. Like literally I'll have students submit in whatever, second, third week of August, and I'll go in the next day with a different student and some random essay popped up, or the prompt changed, like literally overnight. Like weird stuff happens, okay? It's because the school obviously was like, oh, we should change the prompt this year, but students have already submitted what they submitted, and then new ones pop up. Totally fine. The schools know that. That's not a big deal to submit it early. But all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, like literally last night this prompt wasn't there and this morning it's there. So, okay, never mind. We can't submit that today. We got to write a new essay. So things happen. So when I say proofread, I that's what I mean. It's literally going line by line. Also brings back to the first point that having time is very, very important, because that stuff is normal. I'm telling you to expect it. You just want to plan for it and give yourself the time for it. So proofreading, very, very important with your common application. Today I talked about the common application as a whole and the mistakes that students often make. One of those mistakes is essays, which I get asked about a lot. I'm going to talk about that in a future video because that's a whole other thing, but a very important part of your applications. But if you do want some ideas to have for your essays, today I'm giving away my Getting Ideas Worksheet. You can get that link in the description. But this is the exact worksheet I use for even my one-on-one clients. All of my students have to go through this exercise, and it's a really good, robust way to get some really good, juicy ideas for your application essays. So if that's something that you need, is to get some ideas of what you're supposed to write about in these essays, again, go ahead and click the link in the description and you'll get that in your inbox.